Today we're going to talk about the internet and the web. So let's see. Everybody can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing the screen.
Awesome. So a few things again, just to recap our schedule. We started with, I should probably make this bigger. Yeah. We talked about the introduction on day one, talking about information systems being the overall, and then IT being part of information systems, and the computer science being just the part where you build the software from the hardware. We went ahead and talked about IT career paths, the different areas in IT that you can specialize in. And then after that, we talked about the fundamentals, the building blocks, the basic things that you need to know in IT hardware, which is everything that we can touch, the keyboard, the mouse, the monitor, the microphones, earphones, and so on. And then the software, which are countless, I don't think anybody can count the number of software out there. As we speak, more software is being built. Even Facebook is a software because it's depending on the hardware to work. Twitter, all this social media, those are all software. Your email, Gmail, Yahoo, they're all software. The search engine, the web browser, all of those are all software. If you even look at the Microsoft Word, any Word document, the PDF, even the software that you use to watch videos or listen to audios, those are all software. So today, we're going to switch gears and talk about one of the areas that in IT. This is especially one of my favorite areas because, regardless of where you are, you can make a lot of money just from the internet and the web. So what we'll learn today is what's the difference between the two. We'll learn about the building blocks of what you need to build a website and the different areas. We're not going to talk about it in detail because normally it should take me about 40 hours to teach you everything that you can start building your website on your own from start to finish, from scratch, and make as much money as you need. At that point in time, it's up to you if you want to build a website or not, how much you want to charge them, how much time it's going to take you. But it's something very interesting. Once you understand it, once you enjoy it, you can do it for fun, as a hobby, and also make a lot of money from it. Okay. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. So from today, we're going to start talking about, the different areas of web development, the different areas in terms of those career paths. Next week, we'll talk about cybersecurity. Again, it's not going to be a full course on cybersecurity. It's just going to be the fundamentals. After that, we'll talk about database concepts. And then the last day of the month or the last class of the month, we'll talk about cloud computing. Okay. So let's start off with, let's go to the next page. Let's see. All right. So probably hold on a little second because we have Beatrice is joining us. That way I don't leave her behind. All right. Hopefully she can hear me now, but she's still connecting to her audio. So that said, we've talked about the schedule one more time. We talked about introduction, career paths, hardware, software. Today we'll talk about internet and the web, okay? So let's see, again, the flyer was out there. I wanted to point out the different things we'll talk about today. We're going to define what the internet is. We're also going to define what the web is. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the internet and the web. We'll talk about how the web works. and then the ingredients, the things that make up the internet, the web. When I talk about the web here, I'm talking about the World Wide Web. That's short form called WWW, okay? And then most importantly, we'll talk about the 3 languages that make up the web that you need to know if you're going to be building websites. That's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, okay?
Yeah.
Normally, this should take us about 3 hours to complete all of this, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that we can do it in 1 hour or 1 hour, 30 minutes. Sounds good?
Sounds okay.
All right, but then if you're interested in learning more about it, we can set up some time. And I think it's the easiest, by far the easiest thing that you can learn in IT, and by far the most enjoyable from my point of view. And also that would make you a lot of money, not only in the US, anywhere you are in the world where you have internet connection, you have your computer, and you have time to be able to do it. This is one of the areas that has helped me personally out ever since I had my master's degree. I started building software because the website is a software. It's a particular software that is geared towards a particular goal. There are different levels of websites. There's one that might just be your portfolio. Maybe you just want your portfolio out there. Another one could be somebody's business. They just want static information about their business, because on the internet, anybody, anywhere, at any time can access it. So instead of you going from one door to another, telling people about your business, you send your link out there, anyone can access it. So it's like your face to the world. And from there, people can contact you. So you don't just make it out there as a publicity, you use it as a source of gaining clients. If I'm selling merch, or if I'm a barber, I can go ahead and create a website, show pictures of all the other hairs that I'm selling, or all the other people that have cut their hair. You know, when someone sees it, they might want to drive from one place to another just to come and get that done. You know, you can also set it up so that it makes your life easier. People can call you or set up an appointment, and then you know that on Monday I have 2 jobs to do, I have 3 jobs to do. So you're selling yourself rather than having to do it, you know, in a tedious fashion. So that's just one good example. Now, let me jump into the content, okay? As we talked about, again, let me maximize, how do I put this just by itself? There you go. So today we're gonna start with internet and web. What is the internet? Can anybody tell me what do you think the internet is? From your own point of view. Everybody's on mute in case you're speaking.
I'm sorry. Actually talking. So, what I understand by the internet, it means interconnecting network. That is a platform where people can be able to meet, to do business, and all sort of things, regardless of where they are.
Very good, very good. I agree with you. Very good example of putting it, you know, interconnection of networks. That's a short form of the word internet, right? So what would you say is web? What is the World Wide Web if the internet is interconnection of networks?
The web, I think it will be the network itself.
Good try. So let me try to make it black and white, right? So last week we talked about hardware, software. Hardware, software makes up the computer, right? Even if it's your cell phone, that's still hardware, software. If it's a desktop, it's still hardware, software. If it's a TV that uses the internet, that's still hardware, software, right?
Yes.
Now, when you have an internet connection at home, you have your computer, your work computer connected to it, your desktop connected to it, your laptop connected to it, your cell phone connected to it. All of those devices make up a network, okay?
Mhm.
So Camtel, let's say Camtel in Douala has, set up a hotspot, a spot somewhere where different businesses get their internet from it. So in one office, let's say you go to Aqua, one hotel has 10 computers connected to it. That why there is a network for that hotel. You have 10 more hotels that also have 20 computers connected to it. You also have other offices that have 3 computers, 15 computers, and so on. So each of these computers make up computers and devices, whether it's a tablet or phone. Each of them, when they get connected, they make up a network. So the internet now is a connection of all the computers in Douala, in Yaoundé, in Bamenda, in Boya, in Cameroon, together with all the computers in Nigeria, all the computers in Africa, all the computers in Europe, and all the computers in the world. So that's what the internet is. It's just that connection of all those computers. All our computers are connected. So does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Thank
So
you.
it's the connection of the computers. One computer is connected to the other. There might be 10 computers connected in the office. That office is connected to Camtel. Camtel is also connected to another service provider, which is connected to to Nigeria, connected to Gabon, connected to Kenya, connected to Egypt. All those computers are connected around the world. So the connection of all those computers make up the internet. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, what is the web? The web is the fact that each person can have a web page. You can have a web page, I can have a web page. You can have a Facebook page, I can have a Facebook page. You can have a Twitter page, I can have a Twitter page. Someone else might have his company's website, I have another company's website. BBC has their website, CNN has their website, CRTV has their website. All those websites connect to one another. Because if you go to one website, you click a link that will take you to another website. Or you go to the homepage of CNN, you click a link, it will take you to the sports section. You click another link, it takes you to YouTube. From YouTube, you click a link, it takes you to Facebook. So the World Wide Web is the interconnection of all those web pages. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So all the pages connected together, your email is connected to something else and connected to that. All those web pages make up the World Wide Web. Meanwhile, all the computers connected together make up the internet. Does it make sense now?
Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, so most of the time people will not really understand that. They'll just assume that internet is the web. But now that you've been able to spend the first 5 minutes, you've gathered that information, hold it to your chest, challenge anybody that tells you that, you don't have internet on your phone, you don't have a network, you're not connected to the internet because all the computers are connected. But you're connected to the web if you have access to the website, okay?
Okay.
So let's try here and watch this. There's this 3-minute video, which I really like. I think in 3 minutes, it should be able to recap on what I have said, okay? Obviously, you guys know I like going to YouTube. So let's play this and watch.
Although the World Wide Web is often referred to as the Internet, they are not the same thing. The Internet is a huge network of networks that link computers together all over the world using wired and wireless technologies. The World Wide Web is the collection of linked pages that are accessed using the internet and a web browser. English physicist Sir Tim Berners-Lee is regarded as having invented the World Wide Web in 1989. Since then, he has continued the development of web standards and other web-related projects. Website addresses such as fiveminded.com are known by the term Uniform Resource Locator, or URL. The domain name system of the internet includes top-level domains such as .com, .info, .net, .org, .edu, .mil, and .gov, as well as country-specific names and more. As well as the World Wide Web, the internet is used for email, file sharing, online chat, phone and video calls, online gaming, and more. Thanks to the increasing accessibility of the internet, the popularity of the web has exploded over the last 20 years. The web is now used for many different purposes, including online shopping, social networking, games, news, travel information, business advertising, and much more. Social networks such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter have become popular over the last few years. People now spend a large amount of their time online, keeping in touch with each other through these applications and services. Security and privacy have always been a problem on the internet, with many people often unaware of the potential risks they take when putting confidential data, passwords, and personal information into various websites. Viruses and spam emails are other sources over security concerns, which frequently cause disruptions and headaches for users of the web. One of the best and most common ways of finding information on the web is through the use of search engines such as Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Google is currently the most popular search engine, receiving hundreds of millions of search queries every day. The internet is amazing fun, but just be careful with who and where you share your personal information and your photos.
Okay, how is that one? Did that help anybody? Did you guys hear it clearly?
Yes,
I-
good. It was very clear.
Good, good. So do we have any questions from that? Does that paint a clear picture of what the internet and the web are?
It does.
Okay, so internet, you can have email, you can have phone calls, you can have chatting, file sharing, and then you can also have websites, the web, right? And then on the web, for you to be able to use the web, to view a website, you need something known as a web browser. So there are many web browsers out there. Many people are familiar with Chrome. Others used to use Internet Explorer. Others use Opera. There's really a ton of them. Mozilla Firefox, Safari for Apple. Yesterday, one of my students actually taught me a new browser that I'll probably be checking out later on this weekend. You know, that you can use it to watch YouTube and then you don't have to listen to the commercials. So that particular website actually stops commercials. I think instead it's called Brave. So Brave web browser. And yeah, it's a web browser that is free and open source. It's used for privacy focus and it automatically blocks online advertisements and website tracking by default, which is not the case with other browsers. So yeah, those are some of the things that we can learn. So what questions do we have? Everybody is good with the difference between internet and the web? I take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay, okay, awesome. So let me carry on to the next part. The next part now we need to talk about what actually do we need if we're going to build websites, right? To build the internet, all you need is computers and a network. One of the other things that we did not talk about in our webinar sessions is networks. You know, once you're done with software and hardware, or rather once you're done with hardware, the next step is to learn about networks, the ways that computers that computers can be connected together, whether it's wired or it's wireless, whether it's local area network or it's wide area network. We're not going to talk about that. We'll touch it a little bit when we talk about cybersecurity, okay? Because you have to learn how to set up your network. The way you set it up, you have to make sure there's security to make sure that you don't run into issues. So let's go back and focus on what we're talking about. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Does anybody know what these three are? Have you heard about them before?
Yes, I've heard about them before. There was a time I actually started reading on HTML, but along the way I left it because
Okay.
yes. So I know that HTML means hypertext markup language. That's something I can never forget. So
Good.
hypertext markup language. So anyway, these are programs that I use. There are languages used in building websites.
That's exactly correct. You need those three languages if you're going to build websites. And I can tell you that it's fun. You just have to make sure you get the right person to teach you in a fun way. Reading it, personally, I don't like reading, okay? I'm not even going to lie. I don't like reading. If you give me something to read, I'll fall asleep, okay? But you have to make it interesting. If you talk about it, if you actually get your hands on, if you do it and you see what is going on, what happens, you'll be so excited and so happy to want to do more, okay? So HTML is used to build websites. So think about a web page, like this web page we're looking at right here. This web page has this section, which is like a header. It has this other section on the left. It has smaller text. It has a list right here. The list has 1, 2, 3. And then it has pictures. It has links that you click on the link, it takes you somewhere else. That is all HTML. HTML is like, if you want to build a house, you have to divide the house into different sections. So HTML will come in as a builder of the house to be able to say, okay, the parlor will be this way, the room will be this way, the toilet that way, the kitchen this way. And then, you know, you have to have a fence around it. That is what HTML does. HTML can set it up to have 3 areas, 4 areas, and so on and so forth. HTML just for structure, how arrange a web page, how it should look like. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. The main thing there is a style. CSS puts on the style. So after building your house, CSS will be like a painter. You'll come in and say, okay, for the parlor, I'm going to paint it white. I'm going to put windows here. I'm going to put glass windows, or I'm going to put, you know, plank windows, and maybe the glass is going to be white or transparent or black, tinted, and so on. You know, and then it's going to paint the toilet and maybe put tiles in the toilet and so on and so forth. So CSS is for the styling. It's going to make this fancy kind of ceiling and so on and so forth. So it does not do anything with the structure, but you need that structure to be there before you can beautify it, right? If the house is not built, you cannot go ahead and paint it. You have to wait for the house to be built, and then you can paint it what you like. Now, JavaScript is like the magician. It's like the plumber and the electrician. After you build the house, for you to be able to use it, I mean, you go into the house, you want to be able to turn the light on, right? Not only turn the lights on, you also want to be able to use the toilet. You want to have water, running water in the toilet, running water in the kitchen, TV, and maybe a fan with all the heat that is going on and so on. So JavaScript is there for the interaction to make sure that the web page is interacting. So in this case right here, this web page, CSS is the one that changed the color of this session 4 notes to be blue. CSS also changed the color of this, and so on and so forth. CSS can change the background color to be yellow or black, and so on and so forth. But JavaScript will make sure that when I click on this, something happens. Okay, if I don't have JavaScript working, the clicking is not going to help me. When I load up the page, maybe I'll get a pop-up message that says, welcome to my page, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so those are the things that JavaScript does. You can have a pop-up, you can have autofill once you start typing. If I click in here, I start typing, something else fills up the rest of the space, that will be JavaScript. If I put my mouse over here and click, a click action happens, then JavaScript is going to take care of that. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense.
So with those 3 languages, you can build your website. With HTML, that's fine. Your website is just going to be black and white. Okay, it's not going to have all the nyanga and beauty and pop-ups and scrolling stuff. All that stuff is not going to be there. But then when you add CSS is going to make it shine, all this style and so on. Okay. Then JavaScript now will make it more interactive. You make it look like futuristic, kind of. Make sense?
A lot.
Yes, yes.
Awesome, awesome. And these are good, wonderful things to learn. It's not hard to learn them. So let me go ahead and play another 3-minute video that's going to explain to you, in other words, what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
All right, here goes the video.
Every web page on the internet uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Think of them as the foundational coding languages of the internet. Just like how Belgium has 3 languages, French, Dutch, German, web pages also have languages. In the case of websites, their languages are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Sure, you may have heard of them, but do you really know how they work? Web development is what you see when you go to a website. I call them tres amigos. HTML is hypertext markup language, or the builder. CSS is cascading style sheets, which I consider the artist, and JavaScript, the wizard. They're all different languages and work differently, but HTML, CSS, and JavaScript need one another to make a website. Imagine you want to code this homepage using HTML, but just HTML. HTML essentially would define all the content, the text, the images, the links, but without CSS, the artist, and without JavaScript, the wizard, an HTML-only website would look like this. CSS adds the styling to a website. CSS can't live without HTML, or else there's nothing to style. It's responsible for outlining the colors, the fonts, and the positioning of content. Your website will now look like this. Now we come to JavaScript, the wizard. Pop-up error messages, the auto-completes that you use, that is all JavaScript. Now that you understand how it works in the 3 amigos, here are 3 things to remember about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. 1, they make up what is called front-end web development. Front-end web development is what you see when you land on a page, as opposed to back-end web development is actually what makes an application on the web work. 2, web browsers like Firefox and Chrome translate these 3 languages into the visual web page. Without a browser, these languages are just words on a page. Sometimes, because of this, websites look slightly different on Chrome, Firefox, and definitely look different on Internet Explorer, because all of these browsers translate a little differently. 3, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are constantly evolving. It's just like any language. These coding languages have a history. They've been around for a few years now. Right now, the standard language procedures for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are called HTML5. There's even a body and a society online that manages the rules and best practices of how to build for front-end web development. So in the beginning, you actually had HTML controlling a lot of visual aspects. You used a bold tag to make text bold, you used a center tag to make your text centered. But over time, after the 90s, you actually had CSS making up most of that. In the beginning, JavaScript was mostly for pop-ups, and now it animates most of our websites. So whatever you see on the World Wide Web, you have those tres amigos to thank for it.
All right. So does that help out a little bit?
Yeah, it helped, but I have a question.
Yes, go for it. Go ahead.
About the HTML. So how do we get in touch with it? Do we just go to our browser and we just put HTML and it comes, then we start putting a website? How do we get in touch with it?
Very, very good question, which is the next part where we're going into, okay? It has its own, just like any language. If you're going to speak English, you have to use a subject, verb, or subject, verb, object. If you're going to speak French, you have to learn the French words. With HTML, there are particular elements that we learn. There's a particular element that we use for header, a particular element for paragraph, a particular element for image, a particular one for list, another particular one for tables, and so on. So what happens is, in the next part, I'm definitely going to answer this question. You can just use an application, type in the words in there, and then you see it. So one thing I'll show you right now is if you go on any web page, let's say, let me go to yahoo.com, right? Yahoo.com shows me this Yahoo page, right? If you want to see how this Yahoo page was built, if you want to see the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, you can right click on the page. When you right click on the page, can you guys see the page?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
At the very end, at the bottom,
Right click, yes.
you have view page source. If you click on view page source, it opens you. This is the code that was used to build that page. Okay, so it looks like it's a lot, but the most important parts of the code, you would see it in a tag. When you use another software to open it, you will see it easily. So let me close this and then go back to the one we're at, our class room on Google. If you right click on this as well, view page source, it shows you, it always starts with HTML. It's telling me, let me make this bigger. It starts with HTML. It's telling me that the language is in English. The direction is left to right. And then now the head section of the page starts. So we'll talk about all of those. In the head section of the page, you talk about the things that define the page, like the title of the page. The title says classroom. So if you look at the title of your page, it should say classroom. And then you can add images in there and so on. But if you scroll to the bottom, you see the rest of the page where it gives you copyright information, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Okay. Now that is how you see the HTML. If you want to see the CSS and JavaScript, you have to right click, and then where it says the last one, it says inspect. So if you click on inspect, it's going to open a section to your right. On that right-hand section, it shows you the different sections on your page. So if I click on here and click on there, it shows me this is where my class notes was written. So you have a style in here telling you session 4 notes and so on. This is the elements, the HTML elements. The next part at the bottom is showing you the styles. This is the CSS part. Okay. And then if you look at the console, the next one, that is the JavaScript part that is running in the background. So it's telling me some of the JavaScript errors that have popped up on that page. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you look at this file, if you create that file, a text file, just like any other text file that we write a letter, and you put all those elements, all those tags in there, it's going to show just like a text file in normal life. But when you open it in a web browser, the web browser is like a translator. It's like that middleman that would listen to your dialect and then translate it to somebody else in English, or that will listen to your French and translate it to somebody in Spanish. So the web browser, there are many different kinds. If you prefer Google, you can use Chrome browser. If you prefer Microsoft, you can use Internet Explorer or Edge. If you prefer Apple, you can use Safari browser, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that browser takes that code that you have written and transforms it or translates it into what we are actually seeing on the web page. Make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So that's about it in terms of, what you need to know, how all of that works. But I do have a PowerPoint here that will probably take us a long time to go through all of it, but I'll try to go through it as fast as possible. I need you to stop me at any point if you have any questions, okay?
Okay.
All right, so
Okay.
the first thing we'll talk about would be going through the history of the web. How did the web come about? Okay, or how did the internet come about? So first things first, around the 1960s was when the idea of the internet started. That was after the World War, because the guys fighting the World War realized that if you have a messenger, you're sending a message to a messenger from one camp to another camp, the messenger gets killed on the way, that message never gets there. Or if the messenger gets caught, then your opponent is going to get all your message. So what they started doing is, instead of sending one person, they'll send 5 people with different packets of message. So it's known as packet switching, okay? So for instance, I want to send Melvis a message that I'm going to school tomorrow. I'm going to send one person with I am, I send another person with going to, another person with school tomorrow. So if you catch the person that has school tomorrow, you don't understand what I'm trying to say. If you catch another person with I am, you don't get it. You have to get all 3 of them. So when all the 3 of them, they're going to pass different roads to get to their destination. When they get to the destination, that message gets put back together, and then it actually makes sense. Okay. So with that idea, that's how the internet was born. That, okay, we're going to be sending messages using the different connections, because if I have to send a message from here to you in Cameroon, that message does not necessarily have to go through a particular route. It's going to go through many different routes. So it's going to look for the best one. It gets to you and then it gets put back together. But remember, that was in the 60s. Everything was slow, really slow. Okay. So it started then with the late 60s when they had NPL and ARPANET. So it was just 2 schools in the US, one school in the West, another school in the East. They wanted to be able to share their research information. So if you're doing research on the kidney, you want to let the other school know that, hey, I did kidney research, this is my result, this is the experiment I did, and so on. The other school wants to also share their research on hearts and so on. So that's how they started using this method to create pages to share that information. So everything was black and white. They wanted to have tables with their experiments, pictures showing the outcome, the topics, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't a big deal, but that was only inside the US, because there was no way we could communicate with Europe. But then there was satellites started being sent into space. In 1970s, the satellite was able to link US and Europe. Now that the US and Europe got linked up, messages started being sent from US to Europe. So that's how bit by bit the web was getting formed, or the internet was getting formed. Okay, so computers that were connecting the two schools started connecting those schools with other schools in Europe. And then the government started getting connected and so on. Around in 1980, the access to this network, ARPANET, was then expanded to include not only schools, but also certain government institutions. And then that's when we had IP4 being published. Does anybody know what IP stands for? So IP stands for Internet Protocol. A protocol is just a set of rules. Just like the president has his protocol officer. The protocol tells the president, go this way, stand here, stop here, and so on and so forth. So Internet Protocol was published to have different rules to say that this is how the connection has to work. This is how the connection has to be established, okay? So later on, in the late 1980s, we had our first ISP. ISP stands for Internet Service Provider. So like Camtel obviously was not there at that time, but the big companies in the US like Verizon and so on, they were able to start providing internet to these wealthy people, the big people that always had all the money. So they started having internet in the late 80s. And then finally, in 1989, that very smart guy, Sir Tim Berners-Lee from the UK, he came up with this idea to propose a World Wide Web. So the web, as we know it, started in 1989. Before it was just internet. Then now the web was born. And then he created the first browser in 1990. The browser again is what lets us convert that code into what we are actually seeing as a website. And then in 94, that's when we started styling the website because everything was black and white. So in 94, we came up with HTML, CSS style sheets or cascading HTML style sheets. And then JavaScript only came up in 1995 because they wanted to have the pages to be interactive, to have pop-ups and so on. But then around late 2000s or late 1990s, internet started getting on mobile phones. By the time it was the year 2000, we had almost 500 million internet users. By then, internet was just getting to Cameroon because I remember I was still in UB at that time and we had maybe one cyber cafe and then everybody goes there. Everything was so slow. You know, we're still using dial-up and so on. But not much happened after that. You know, many people were accepting it and so on and so forth. But then around 2008, Google created its own web browser because between that 2000 and 2008, many web browsers were being created. Any company wanted to create their own web browsers because they know, hey, this thing is booming, let's make money. So the people that were creating websites were having a difficult time because your website will be good on Internet Explorer, but will be looking bad on Mozilla Firefox. So you have to work so hard to make sure your website is good on every browser. But eventually all the browsers came together around the late 2010s to say, okay, let's have a standard. That's why we started having a standard for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But now, fast forward to about 2017, the very first internet on the phones was around 2000, 17 years after. About 50% of people using the website or the internet or the web were on mobile devices. If we count the number of users around that 2017, we have changed from 500 million to almost 4 billion. If you check right now, today, it's probably about 8 billion. And about 80% of people using the internet or using the web are using it on mobile devices. Nobody sits on the computer anymore to look at the website. How many of you have sat on a computer to look at the website? Even the class, you want to attend class, you attend it on your phone. So what I'm trying to say here is that since 1990 up to 2022, that's how many years? 32 years.
32 years.
A lot has happened. You have seen the major differences that have taken place. And this 32 years is nothing when you compare history. Think about all of this happened way after the Second World War. You know, think about all the major discoveries when you had fire and light and so on. Those are the real historic things. But that's why now is the time for you to get into the internet and the web. That's why when we talked about Amazon guy got smart because he realized that this thing is growing really fast. You know, let me find 4 things that I can sell on the internet. He got books, he got TVs, he got appliances, you know, DVDs, music, and then he realized books is a thing. That's how come he's very wealthy today, because he took advantage of it back then. So think about all the businesses in Cameroon. By the time it gets very popular in Cameroon, all of them are going to need a website. How many people are there in Cameroon that will be able to build them a website, a very good one, and also maintain it, because they need to be changing it all the time. It's just like the era of the automobile. When automobile was discovered, mechanics made a lot of money, because if you know how to fix a car, anybody whose car gets bad, they have to call you because they need their car. And anybody that's working in the automobile industry was doing good. So now you want to be in the web industry, the internet industry, so that you're well placed to be able to, you know, get your own piece of the pie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Any questions so far before I move to the next part?
So just to be clear,
Yes,
you mean the internet only came after the Second World War?
that is correct. There was no internet after the Second World War. Remember we talked about, you know, when the first generation, second generation, third and fourth generation computers. Back then you have a computer that fills up an entire room, right? But you know, that computer, you couldn't even connect it to another one. Very few people had computers. Computers were used in very few places, like the NASA Space Center, to be able to do very complicated computations, okay? But then around the 1970s, people started having personal computers. Now, when they start having personal computers, then you start having connections from one personal computer to another. So in late 60s, you had a school in California trying to connect with a school in New York. When you have those schools connecting, they are sharing research so that they don't have to repeat their research, so that they can build on their research from one another. We did not even have satellites in space. First satellite went to space around the 70s, 1970s. It was only then that we're able to connect from US to Europe through the satellite. Because you cannot see directly, you need that point of sight. So finally, slowly and surely, all the computers started getting connected more and more. And now there's no way you can even take down the internet. So if somebody tells you that they are going to bring down the internet, there's no way you can turn off all the computers that are connected on the internet, because there are just that many. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So is there a central body that controls like the internet? Is there a central body?
Very good question. So we did talk about in 1981, right here, the IP4 was published. IP4 is like the internet protocol, because obviously every computer on the internet has its own number, right? That IP address. The IP address identifies each computer, just like every home has a home address. If you follow the home address, it's going to take you to the particular house that you're looking for. So every computer has an IP address that is governed by that body, but there were many different bodies that were put in place, you know, and we'll talk about that shortly too, because obviously you need some kind of order and some kind of standard to be able to get things done. Sounds good?
Yes.
All right, so let me try to run through the rest of the contents before you start asking more questions. Hopefully it answers some of your questions. So we've talked about the history of the web. Like I pointed out, the internet, it started around the 1960s, and everything that we've seen in that previous chart was about internet and web. But what I'm showing you right now is just the internet, how it moved from packet switching research to NPL and ARPANET, and then satellites connecting the US and Europe, and then having IP4 to be able to give each of the computers a number, and then expanding the ARPANET. Right now we have IP6 because IP4 was exhausted. Remember when they started in the 60s, they did not envisage, they didn't think that they would have billions and billions of people using the internet. Now they exhausted all the numbers that they had. They have to expand it now to have even trillion numbers that can address each computer. And then now you had internet service providers that bought a bunch of internet space and then selling it to consumers. And the internet got on the phones around 1999. So only about 20 years that internet has been on the phones. And now we have 80% of all the users of the internet are using it from their phone. Okay, now this is a part where we talk about the history of the web. The World Wide Web started around 1989. And it's still very, very young. It's still going to change a lot. So if you get in right now, you'll be better placed before those who are going to come in after. So we got our first browser in 1990, CSS in 94, and JavaScript in 95. Make sense? Awesome. That said, let's talk about how the internet works. I know Tim asked that question before. How do we get this text to be able to show that way? So the way it works, again, the World Wide Web, by definition, it is information space where you have documents and other resources which are identified by a URL. URL is Uniform Resource Locator, just like a GPS to any particular location. So it's interlinked by hyperlinks and can be accessed via the internet. We talked about the difference between the web and the internet. We need the internet, which was discovered around the 60s, to be able to build on and get the web. So the web is just information space. And then you can have documents and resources. Resources here is talking about pictures, videos, and other documents. And each of them are saved somewhere with a link. That link is the URL, the Uniform Resource Locator, okay? So that said, in order for the web to work, you need ingredients. The main ingredients, you need that your HTML document that we are going to create, right? HTML document is going to also be having images and other files and videos and so on. That HTML document, we are the ones that are going to create it. We're going to save it somewhere. Wherever we save it, it's going to be the URL, which is known as the Uniform Resource Locator. So normally they'll tell me, what's the URL of your website? That's what they mean by that name that is being said. And then the third thing is the protocol. Like we said, a protocol is just a set of rules that, you know, the president wants to go here, he needs a protocol officer to set things up. So this protocol makes sure that there's no traffic jam, you know, everybody's link can go to its location and so on. So the protocol used for the web is HTTP. H for hyper, T for text, T for transfer, P for protocol. So you don't need to memorize this, but every website you go to, every single website in this world always starts with HTTP because it's enforcing that protocol. Some of them start with HTTPS to show that it's secure so that hackers cannot easily go in and cause havoc. Okay? So those are the three main ingredients: your HTML document, your URL, and the protocol. So how does that work? Putting it all together, first, you're going to use your computer. You can use your computer or your phone or your tablet. That's known as the web browser, okay? The web browser on your computer goes in, you type in a URL, right? That URL that you type usually starts with HTTP. And then it gives you the name of the server, where that file is located, and the name of the file. Now that you have used HTTP, the internet knows to take that request, go through the internet connections, and get to that server. It's going to follow a certain rule, something known as DNS, domain name server, that is going to match this name with the location of that server, goes to that server, looks for that document. So this is the document that you wrote. When it sees that document, document1.html, it copies that document and brings it back to your computer. When it brings it back to your computer, now your web browser takes it and displays it as a web page. So that's how it works. You put in the URL on your computer. The URL goes into the web browser. The web browser takes it using HTTP, follows the protocol to where the server is located, grabs the file, brings it back to your computer and shows it. It happens in a split second. If you have a fast internet connection, you click the link, it opens right away. If you have a slow internet connection, then you click and wait. It keeps going slowly until it gets to the server, it gets a document, it comes back, and then it shows you. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So here we're talking about the document as HTML. In other cases, it could also be CSS or JavaScript, because those are the three types of documents, the three types of languages that we need for a website, right? Does that help? Does that make sense?
Okay, so my question is, so do you mean you can only start your search with CSS, or because I understand that when you want to okay, I understand.
You got it
Let's
now?
go.
Okay,
Yes, I
so
get it.
think about it this way. Think about you go to a restaurant, you want to eat, right?
Mhm.
When you go to that restaurant, they'll give you a menu. That menu is going to be, you're going to choose a URL from that menu, right? The person that's going to give you that menu, that person is like the web browser. They're the client, they're the ones taking your order. So take your order and go now to the kitchen. The person in the kitchen is like the web server. From that kitchen, they're going to take your document that you have requested. If you wanted rice and beans, they're going to take the rice and put it together with the beans and then mix it up using the protocol and then send it back to you through that same protocol. The person that took your order is going to come back and take your food, bring it and give you on a plate at your seat where you're sitting. So again, you're requesting one thing, the URL, but you're getting a website back. You're requesting rice and beans on a paper, but they're bringing your food and giving you. If you request something else, ndole and plantain, that's what you're going to get. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. It makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So again, just know each one of those documents, each one of those resources could be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, it could be a picture even, okay?
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. That's how the ingredients of the web work together. Your web browser is very much needed for you to be able to see the website, but you need the document, which is HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. You need the HTTP protocol, to take that URL to the server and then bring it back to you. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
I have a worry.
Yes, go for it.
Previously you said to create a web page, you need the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript.
Yes.
But now, from what you just said, you say you can either use the HTML, that the document can be the HTML or CSS or JavaScript.
Very,
Does
very,
it mean,
go for it. Go ahead. Sorry, finish.
does it mean like you can create independently, not necessarily bringing the three together?
Okay, very good question. It's always good that you bring the three together. CSS cannot be very useful without HTML. JavaScript also is not going to do anything without HTML. You can have just HTML, that's fine, but your page is going to look black and white, right? So remember we said HTML again is the structure. It's like you build a house. The house is there. There's no paint. There's no, it's not painted. There's no water. There's no electricity, but that's fine. You can still stay there. But maybe your neighbors are going to be looking at you and wondering like, which kind of house is this? Maybe you will not have visitors. But then when you add another language in there, the CSS, to come and paint it and beautify it, right? Then you're going to have people are going to start looking at your house like, okay, it looks good. Because remember, we're talking of a web page. You want to build a web page that people will see and like and want to come and visit. If you open your phone and you click on a website and you just see black and white, you probably just close it now. But when you open it and then you see pictures, videos, things passing left and right, you're like, yeah, and I correct web page this. And then you start scrolling and looking around. So that's why you usually want to have all three of them, because the HTML will build the content, the CSS will do the styling, and then the JavaScript is going to make it interactive. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yes, so it can be 3 files all together. You can request them, normally you write just HTML, which I'll explain later on. The HTML is connected to the CSS and it's also connected to the JavaScript. So once you just request for the HTML, it goes and then it comes with all of that. So for instance, you're sitting at a restaurant, you've decided that you want achu. When they are going to bring you that achu, they have to make sure that they bring you water to wash your hand. They'll also bring you extra meat and maybe put pepper on the side and so on. But you did not ask for all of those things. Naturally, they know that if I'm going to serve you achu, I have to bring you water to wash your hand. I have to bring you all these other things. Does that make sense?
All right, it does.
Yeah. So again, let's take a look at that. At the end of the web browser where you're sitting, you, the client, you request for that HTML document. The HTML document has a link that's linked to the CSS and another link to the JavaScript. It goes through the HTTP protocol over the internet, goes to the server, grabs the information, and then you're good. Okay. So quick things to remember here. The web is only possible because we have the internet, right? The internet has been around since the 80s, but the web has been around since the 90s. 1998, right? So we use the web. In order for us to use it, you need a web server. The web server is where the person that creates a website is going to save the HTML file and save the CSS file, save pictures, save everything there. And then the person that needs to get to that website uses a URL, the Uniform Resource Locator, to identify the resource on that web server. That protocol, HTTP, is going to be used to transfer that file from the server to your computer or to your cell phone or to your tablet. And then now your web browser is going to be what you use to convert that document into what you actually see as a website. Okay. Does that explain it completely?
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. What other questions we have? Everybody's all clear about it now? No questions?
Okay, it's clear for me.
Awesome, awesome. That's good to know. So we can go in depth, to talk more about each one of these, but I'm going to speed through this because we have a long way to go. Like I said, this normally should take about 3 hours for me to complete this whole stuff, go through all 80 slides. But I don't want to hold you guys for the rest of the day. But I want you to at least understand just this first part, how the internet was born, how the web is tied to the internet, the history of it, the languages we need to learn. Because after this, now what we need to talk about would be, okay, finish loading. What we need to talk about is then what HTML is, where it came from, what CSS is, where it came from, and how you can create it, because those are some of the questions that you probably have. Sounds good?
Yes.
So let me see, it's 10 minutes after the hour, so it's about 7:10. Let's see if I can run through this in about 5 minutes for 5 to 10 minutes for HTML, and then do the same for CSS and JavaScript, okay? So HTML, we did say HTML is hypertext markup language. It's a standard markup language for creating web pages and web applications. Application, again, is software. That's why a web page is a software. It's just something that you use on the internet or on the web browser. So where did it come from? Historically, in the 1990s, the first HTML was created. There was a draft that was done, and then there was HTML version 2. We have had multiple versions of HTML. Every year they used to meet, to come up with a new version to be able to address the new browsers that were being created. Because, a new company comes up and says, okay, I'm going to create my own web browser and so on. So around 2000, all the way to around 2014, there were many browsers being created. Before, it was just Netscape, Internet Explorer, that was fine. All web pages were almost identical. But then we had about 20, 30 different web browsers. Now you don't know if the person visiting your website is using Internet Explorer or something else. So you have to be able to accommodate for all of that. But finally, around 2014, HTML5 was decided, all those companies came together and said, you know what, we are tired of this. Let's come to an agreement. We're all going to follow this standard. So by 2017, HTML5 became the living standard. Now every website looks almost the same on every browser. Okay, before it wasn't the case. It was really problematic for the developers. Now, that said, the key things to remember, Tim Berners-Lee was the one that discovered the web, created the first web browser as well with HTML. And just like the conflict that's going on in Cameroon, there were many things that were going on too as well in terms of HTML with conflict. They had a task force that was created, Internet Engineering Task Force in '93, to be able to decide that, okay, this is what we are going to be using going forward. This is what's correct, this is what's wrong. And then in '96, they had the World Wide Web Consortium. These are all the kind of words that we're used to with all the crisis that's going on. The consortium was there to be able to decide what are the new rules that have to be put in place for HTML, what are the things that did not accept, and so on. But by 2000, it became an international organization of standardization. Okay, this is a standardization that is used for all electrical stuff. So in IEC, which is International Electrotechnical Commission, decided to give it a standard to say, okay, this is what everyone is going to be doing going forward. But by 2004, they had a working group, Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group, where all these big companies decided to come together to work together to make sure that HTML becomes easy for everybody. But yeah, so those are some of the things that have happened. Now, what does the structure of HTML look like? Normally, an HTML document looks like this, just like on a paper, just like on a notepad or any text editor. It starts with this exclamation sign, doc type HTML. It's telling you that this document type is HTML. Once your web browser sees that first line, it knows that it's going to translate all of this to look like a web page. And then you have an element, everything goes inside this root element. The opening element, which starts with less than, greater than, and then closes with the same name, but an additional /. Within your HTML element, you have two parts. You have the head and the body. The head has information about the page, like the title of the page, the author, the date it was published, the keywords, the description. Those are the things that are known as meta information about the page. So when a search engine goes to your web page, it sees this information, then it puts it now on a Google search and so on. So if you don't put keywords there, if people search for that keyword, they're not going to see your web page. So that's very important for that. The body is actually what you see on the page. So if you have to write a story, this is where you have to write your story. If you have to put an image in your story, this is where it has to go. If you have to put a list or table and so on, it has to be inside this body. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
if you write the code, an example of the code like this, you have your document type telling the browser that, hey, this is an HTML document. You have your root element starting there and ending down here. And you have your head. In the head, I have said my title is my page HTML or my HTML page. That's what shows up here. So if I change it, it's going to show up. That way it defines your page. If you have many tabs open, you can identify your tab based on the title that you have in your head. Now within the body, you have a division. You have divided a part of the body of your page. And in that division, you have an unordered list, a list that does not have an order, right? The opposite of that is an ordered list. An ordered list has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. An unordered list has bullet points. So that's how come we have bullet points here. And this is a list item. This another list item, and that's another list item. So there are 3 list items there. So when you write this in a text paper, you open it in a browser, this is what it's going to look like. Does that make sense?
Yes, but what's a text paper like? Is it like a normal?
Yeah, it's just like a normal Word document. So let me, I wish I could show you that now, but let's go in here. For instance, if I go in and let's see, I'm not using a computer. Let's see if I can open. Okay, let me open a document. Can you guys see the document I just opened? No, I don't think you can. Let me open
No,
it.
I cannot see it.
Let me share my screen again. So let's share my entire screen. Okay, so you should be able to see it now. So I'm trying to create a new document. Okay, so this is a new document right here, right?
Yeah.
By going to the document and type exclamation mark, doc type. Let me make sure you can see. Oops. Where did it go? It's only at the bottom. Okay, that way you can see it bigger. Can you see better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so doc type HTML, I close that. And then I know I'm going to have HTML tag opening and then another one closing, right? Within these two, I want to have my head section, and my head section is going to close right here, okay? Inside the head section, I want to have a title. Let's just say my title is going to be test page. And then I'm going to close it and put title. Okay, now I need a body. Let me go ahead and also shift this so that it looks good. Oops, undo. I want it to look nice so that you can read it easily. Okay, now we also have the body that starts in there, and let's say the body is going to end right here. So within the body now, I can go in and say, this is a sample text. Once I create this document, I can go ahead and save it. The only thing I have to do is make sure I save it as an HTML document. So right here, it's asking me for the file format. I have to change it and save it as a web page. So you see the .html.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I save it as a web page. I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to give it a name, test. Okay. Where do I want to save it? Let me just save it on my desktop. Okay. Actually, let me create a new folder in my desktop and call it session 4. Okay, so I created a new folder called session 4. I'm going to save it in there. Save. Now I've saved the file. Okay. If I
Yes.
go back now to my desktop, let's create a new desktop. So this is my desktop, right? This is my folder called session 4, right?
Yes.
I'm going to open that folder. Inside that folder, you can see that's a file called test, right? Can everybody see it?
Yeah.
So I can open this file. You can already tell that it's going to open in Chrome because it has realized that it's an HTML document. So I'm going to double click on it. Oh, we didn't save it correctly. Let's see, what did I miss? Save as show properties. Nope. No, I'm using the wrong one. Okay, so let me copy this text and save it using something else. Visual Studio Code. Obviously, I'm using the wrong computer. I should be using the other one. So I'm going to have to use a different software. So you have to use the right software, in this case, Notepad. Let me go ahead and download it real quick. Since I'm using this, it should go faster, I hope. Let's see. It's my Visual Studio. Some text. For some reason it's not working. Right, so this is what I need. All right, so it's going to take 2 minutes. So once that downloads, I'm going to show you what it actually means or what it actually takes. But normally when you save this as HTML, it should work totally fine on your, once you open it, it should open up as the text file, okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm going to go back into that, but let me make sure I round up the rest of this real quickly. I was hoping to take 10 minutes, but no. All right, so that's what it looks like. Now you can add more expressive stuff. As you see, this is the key that you want to do, or should I say the template when you want to start creating an HTML file. You have your doc type, your HTML, the head part, the body part. This is where your content goes into, okay? Within that content, you can add many different things. These are more expressive ways. So think about your web page like a newspaper. The newspaper has a header section, right? And then you can also have a navigation. So think of web pages again, you have a navigation at the top that says home, about, contact us, help, blah, 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 blah. That's all navigation. And then now you have the main part of your page. Within the main part, you can have an article, you know, that's all written, and then you have an aside, maybe something on the side, maybe it's a picture, maybe it's a table, maybe it's something that you want to highlight. And then at the bottom, you have the footer. In the footer, you can have copyright information, you can have addresses and so on. So this is how you actually set up your HTML page. Remember, HTML is just the structure. You set up the structure of your page like that, and then you build it and so on and so forth. Afterwards, you can go style it the way you want, okay? So again, you can also add audio, you can add music to your web page. You can also add a form for someone to enter their information and submit it. You can even add a canvas where people can draw on your web page, or you can add a video from YouTube or a video that you created yourself and so on and so forth. Okay, sounds good?
It sounds
Very
good.
good.
Okay.
Awesome. Now, there are different types of browsers that you can use. I don't want to talk about this too much, but you can use Internet Explorer, Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and so on and so forth. Okay. You can use Amazon, Opera, Chrome, and so on and so forth. That's just fine as well. Does that make sense? But depending on what you want to use, you can go to caniuse.com to check, but don't worry about that because that was mostly popular before. Now you don't really need to worry about it because all the web browsers are working almost the same. So we've talked about an example again of how the HTML works, like this, and the same ingredients we talked about. You request an HTML page, it gets pulled back and gives you a web page that you can actually look at. Okay, so the HTML document is always stored in the web server. When the user wants to go to your website, they write the URL, it goes through the HTTP protocol. They come in and grab that document, and then it can go in there. But the question that Beatrice just asked, how do you write the HTML? You can write it from scratch by using a text editor. A text editor like Notepad. I'm using an Apple MacBook, so the text editor is not too good for me to use. It doesn't conform with the one that is used. An editor is just, you know, simple black and white, but then there's also something called an IDE. An IDE is an integrated development environment. Okay, that's the one that I just downloaded. Visual Studio, Eclipse, Atom. It comes with a few bells and whistles. It helps you to autocomplete. It gives underline, it color codes it so that it's easy for you to use. So let me go into the one that I just downloaded so that we can take a look at it. So where is it? There it is. And then I can run it so that we can test it out, okay? So Visual Studio. Come on, it's loading up. It should probably take about 30 seconds. And then after that, we can test the code and you see what it actually looks like. So normally that's the software that we use to write code. It is free to download. You don't need to pay for anything. You don't even need to enter your email address or none of that. Okay, so where is it? Okay, it's still coming on. Come on, verifying. And once we're done with that, let me go back to session. I don't think that's the one I want. There we go. Okay, so again, you can actually start from scratch, or you can use what is known as a framework. I don't want to bother you about that right now, but there's a framework and library. A framework is something that has already been built for you. It's built for you, you just go in and make a few changes, and then you have a website. So for example, you have a framework like C#. I don't want to talk about that because it's too complicated for us at this level. It's a MVC model controller, model view controller setup that you can use to build on your own. You can also use PHP, Java, Ruby, Python, Node, Go, WordPress, and so on as frameworks. But the main things that we want to remember for HTML is that it is a basic markup language. Think about it as somebody is writing in a ledger and marking it up, okay? When they write and mark it up, then you can be able to read it easily. So it's a standard for elements and attributes, which we've talked about. We don't want to go into it too in depth, but there were many organizations and groups that have worked through it all these years to make sure that it is what it is. The task force, the consortium, the International Organization of Standardization, and the working group. But many elements and attributes are used in HTML, which we'll talk about later on. You can write it from scratch, or you can use a framework. So writing it from scratch, I've downloaded that. Let me open it, and then we can take a look at it, okay? So this is what the Visual Studio Code looks like. All right. I already have some, oh, I did have it already. I didn't really need to download it. I already have some code in there that I'd already written, okay? So there's a folder in there that has web dev to 2020, but let me go ahead and open another folder. Let's see, on that, sandwich vision, US cities. I don't want the CSS, I don't want that. So this is an example of an HTML document. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, so this HTML document, again, it has a head section. My head section has the meta, it has a title, it has a link, you know, to the CSS page and so on. And then in here you have the body. So if I go ahead and try to open this page, let me click on here. This is how it looks like in text, but if I open it in a browser, this is how it will look like. So let's go ahead and create the one that we did earlier and try to open it up. So let me remove this from workspace. All right, so now I can open the folder that we created on our desktop and go to the desktop and session 4. So this is the folder and this is the file, right? So if I click on the test file, you can see this is everything that I wrote. It didn't work out perfectly well because they have other things added in there. So let me go ahead and paste. This is exactly what we wanted, right? Can everybody see clearly?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, so yes.
Yeah. So let me make it up. That's too big. I'll make it smaller. Awesome. So with this, I can go ahead and save this. Now that I've saved it, if I open this, let me put it to the side so that we can see it side by side, the code. And when I click on go live, it's going to open it in the browser. This is what it shows. Does that make sense? So it's showing this text that I have. This is a sample text. That's what it's showing on there. If I add more stuff, it's going to show it out there. If I go ahead and put a header, you can use a header by using H1. And then I say this is heading number 1. If I save it, it's going to show up on there. So let's click on File, Save. Now it's showing this is heading 1. So that's how you go ahead and build a website. You just have to know what to put in there. You can add another paragraph and say P, that's a paragraph. And I'm going to put the content. This is an example of a paragraph. And once I'm done, I save it. And I can see that in there. So you write it just like a regular text message, but when you open it in the browser, it shows up that way. And the title in here is saying the title is test page. If I expand this, you should see the title is test page. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's very easy to build a web page. You just need to remember all the different tags, all these elements, and it's going to help you. Now that I'm using an IDE, if I put my mouse over the body, it tells me the body element represents the content of the document. If I put my mouse over H1, tells me the H1 element represents a section heading. If I put my mouse over P, tells me the P element represents a paragraph, and so on and so forth. So it's something easy to learn. It will probably take us about 40 hours to go through everything on there. But if you want to do 4 hours a day, that can take you 10 days. If you want to do 8 hours a day, that can take you about 5 days. If you want to do 2 hours a day, it would take you about 20 days. But it depends on how much you want to learn it and how willing you are to practice, because the key is practicing. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
So
Very good.
let me close that. But that's just what HTML is about. That's why if you go to any web page, if you come now to this web page, right click and click on view source, you will see that's exactly what we wrote, right? We had our head, the title. This is all what we wrote. The rest of it, this code was injected by the server. So we did not write that code. It's just injecting it in there. But this is all what we wrote for our web page. That's why any website you go to, you should be able to see the web page information. Make sense?
It makes sense. But is it possible to see the information of the writer?
It depends if the person puts it in there. Normally that information, let me go back to the page. Normally that information will go in the head. So in the head section, I can go in and put in another tag which says meta. And in the meta, let's say that's a meta tag. I can have an author, description, oops. In the character sets, I can't remember what character set to use. The other one is keywords. I don't think that's the right one. Yeah, but definitely you would see the author and so on, depending on how much information the person wants to do.
Yes,
Yeah.
I get that. My question was just whether, in case of hackers or thieves or people that want to use it for the,
Yes,
that's
it
what I'm
depends. It
saying.
depends how you want to, if you want your information to be out there. Most of the time, it depends. If it's proprietary, if it's something that you're doing for your company, then you probably want to put your information in there so that if somebody wants to follow up with a question and say, okay, we need to get a new version. So normally you have comments, you can also add comments in there. Comment is the part of the code that does not actually get translated. So to add a comment in here, I can use, let's see. Oh, did I forget? There you go. Oh, let's go ahead and just type it out. So this is, oops, is a comment. So let's click on that. Oh, that's fine. Let me reduce the size here. Just I cannot see. There you go. So selection, comments. There you go. So that's a comment. You can always add a comment in your code, and then you can say author is Vitus, date. Today's date is July 9. And then synopsis, test page for HTML, version 4. And then you can also have a version. Say this is version 1.0 and so on. So you can have all that information in there. Let me go ahead and save that. Okay. And then if I click on go live, it opens it up again. All of that information is not showing in here, right? But if I right click and click on view page, I can see all the comments that were in there. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Oh, so if you want to have information in there, if it's somebody's code, you want to say, okay, this is my code, do not copy it, stuff like that, you can always go ahead and do that. So let me go ahead and spell this correctly because I cannot spell heading correctly. So this code should not be copied and so on. So if somebody copies it and puts it on their website, and then you can see it and so on and so forth. But yeah, sounds good.
Sounds great.
Awesome. I think we've really gone way above time today, and I feel really bad about that. But let's see, the next thing that we had to talk about would be CSS. So we won't talk about CSS and JavaScript, but just understand, I can go through quickly. CSS has similar history, where it came from, the similar history, it's cascading style sheets, how you create it, similar history, like I said, it's got different versions, CSS1, CSS2, now it's CSS3, and it's always going to be CSS3, okay? So what you do is you try to take rules, you set up rules. Normally CSS is difficult, that's why it's showing you this way. CSS, you try to do some things and then it cuts other areas off instead of completing it all. So it's the level of difficulty of doing CSS. So this is an HTML page, which we have looked at before. In order for us to make CSS to work with this page, we can go ahead and add CSS by adding like style. Here we say style, color blue. So now it's going to change everything to blue. Okay. Here we have said on the second one, style, change the font style to italics. So it's changed this one to italics. So that's known as line styling. You're styling it within the line of code. Okay, but normally styling is usually done outside the code. For instance, here you're using style in the head section. So here you're saying that wherever you see a div element, color it blue. Wherever you see an italic class, color it, set it to italic. So here is a div. Everything in here is going to be blue. This is a class for this element called italic. So it's going to set this to italic. And normally the best way is to have a separate file, which is a CSS file. And then you have a link to in the head section of your HTML. That link has a relationship of style sheets. It has the name, href is hyperlink reference to that style sheet. Why we do it this way is because you can have one style sheet and it's good for all your pages on that website so that all your pages look uniform. It has a particular theme. If you want all your backgrounds to be blue, you just point all the web pages, your contact page, your about us page, your home page, every single page on your website pointed to that one style sheet. So if you need to make a change, you go to just this one document and change it. You don't have to go to 10, 20 different documents to make the change. And then you forget one and then you make a mistake in another one. It's very problematic. So those are the three ways in which you can add CSS to the page. So now you have your HTML page, you're linking it to that style sheet. You have your about us page, you're also linking it to that same style sheet. Both of them are going to look the same. They're all going to have blue color because they are following that same style sheet that you use. Okay. So there are different ways that you can select elements. HTML does the structure. You can select a div, an element, you can select a class, you can select an ID, you can select multiple elements at the same time, and you can select parent and descendant elements. So elements that are inside other elements. So again, it gets complicated, but yeah, you can also set priority. You want some styles to be more important than other styles. You want to override the priority and so on and so forth. So even having background colors like this, you can do that with CSS. Okay. So CSS again really beautifies your page. Again, you have to double check and make sure it works on the browser that you're using and so on and so forth. So similarly, ingredients, once you have that link, your URL is now going to go and pull the HTML and the CSS file, bring it up, and then it's going to beautify your page, and then you're good. But that's about it. Once it gets to the web browser, that's where it does its mechanism to be able to integrate that CSS in the HTML and make your page look beautiful. All right. So how do you write CSS? Very similar to the way you write HTML. Also the same with JavaScript. You use either your text editor or you use your IDE. And you can also use libraries, which we're not going to talk about, or you can use frameworks. But all of that are all ways that you can be able to utilize CSS. So key thing, CSS is for styling. It gets interpreted by the web browser after it's been transported from the server. You want to use a separate CSS file because you can reuse it and it's easy for you to maintain it. And then CSS provides you properties that are evolving towards mobile and animation. Writing it from scratch or using a library like Bootstrap that has already been done for you, you just import it and then you don't have to rewrite everything. That's it. Next up is JavaScript. JavaScript, again, similar history like all of them. It's a high-level interpreted programming language. It is not Java. Java is a whole different story. It's like comparing carpet and car. They just have CAR, but they are two different things altogether. So it has its own history too, very similar to what we've talked about. It's had different versions. Now there are on the most stable version, ECMA 6 or ECMA 2000, ECMAScript 2017. So we've talked about it's a high-level programming language. Here you can use it that, hey, when you click on this button, the button says seize the date. That's the name of the button, see the date. If you click on it, it's going to write something on your page. So you can set it up to have pop-ups, to write on your page, to also go to the console and so on. So I don't want to talk much about it because JavaScript is very detailed, but just know that you can use it for pop-ups and so on. Very similar. You can also use, again, you can attach it to HTML file just like we've attached the other ones, and it should be just fine. Again, always check your browsers, make sure your browser can handle everything you're requesting. And that's about it. So now you have all three of them, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML for the structure, CSS for the styling, JavaScript for the interaction. And with those three, you can definitely create web pages that will look very awesome. How do you type JavaScript? The same way you do HTML and CSS, either with a text editor or with an IDE. And you can also use libraries and frameworks, which have already been built for you. And you can borrow the content and use it for yours. So those are examples of some of them. Few things to remember, JavaScript is what actually glues the web. It is not derived from Java. The reason it's called JavaScript is because Java was popular. So the guys just wanted some market share. So they decided to create a language and gave it a name that's like JavaScript because they wanted to also get popular that way. Okay. So that language, you can use it to interact with your HTML. You can interact with your web browser. You can also interact with other systems. You know, you can use JavaScript to be able to pull information from Facebook, Twitter, and all those if they have an application programming interface. So the language is standard, just like HTML and CSS. You can write it from scratch or you can pull it from a library. Sounds good? So I had to run real fast through that one, but again, those are all the things I really wanted you guys to capture today. What questions do we have? That's a lot of information again today, right?
A lot.
Yes.
I don't really want to start asking that.
It is a lot of information. And what I can give you guys is, I don't know if you can download it or not, but I'll give you a link to a book that you can download online. I'll send you guys the link. It's a very good book. I use it all the time. I actually, here is another copy. I gave it to my kids, but this is what the JavaScript version of the book looks like. Okay. So it's written by John Dockett, but let me open the HTML version for you. HTML, CSS, John Dockett, there it is. Okay, so this is what the book looks like. And you can actually have a PDF version. This is a PDF version, about 500 pages. Let's go ahead and advance. And it's very, very easy to read. With this book, you can learn HTML and CSS all by yourself. It's good to read, understand. It has illustrations and so on. So I'll send you this link, or you can go and search online. If you want to print it out, it's 500 pages. I don't think you should, but you probably can go in there, save it on your device and open it and read it anytime. So this is what it looks like. Very easy on the eyes.
Please, what's the name again? What's the name of the book again?
The name of the book is HTML and CSS. That's what it looks like. So HTML and CSS by John Dockett, Jon. So if you go to Google and type HTML and CSS book, PDF, or John Dockett, each one of those, you're going to get the first one you get is docket.pdf. Okay, so that's the one I've opened right here. And it explains you how the web works. You know, it shows you here, this is a breakdown. We're going to talk about the structure of HTML, how you can write text with HTML, how you can write lists, how you can write links, images, tables, forms, and extra markup. Also talks about Flash, video, and audio. And then chapter 10 starts with CSS, how you can set up color, text, boxes, and so on and so forth. But it's really, really good. This is by far the best book on every subject that I've ever seen. It writes it so nice and elegant. Okay, so it tells you right here, oops, what HTML is done, how the chapters are broken down, the practicals, and so on and so forth. All right.
Mhm.
So yeah, how websites are created. We've talked about that. If you read this page, you should be able to understand. Okay, so what you see when you're looking at a website, it's most likely that your browser will be receiving HTML and CSS from the web server that hosts the site. The web browser interprets the HTML and CSS code to create a page that you see. Very easy. Okay, how it's created, it talks about all those stuff, you know, how the web works. As you can see, it tells you here how the web works. Okay, you visit the website, the web browser hosting the website will be anywhere in the world, you know, or rather the web server hosting the website could be anywhere. So I can be in the USA and I'm visiting a website from Japan. So I have to use the internet to get to that Japanese server. And then from there, the Japanese server will send me back the files and then I can see it on my computer. Okay. So it's explaining all of that with nice diagrams and pictures before you start going into the structure to understand how all what I've been writing here, what all these things actually mean. But once you get the hang of it, you should be good to go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So I think we tried our best to try to finish everything in 2 hours. All right. So what questions do we have before we call it a day?
We'd like to give it a try.
Yeah, if you have questions, always don't hesitate to let me know and I'll try my best to answer them, okay?
Okay.
All right. If no
I
questions,
wanted to ask one question, please.
yes, go for it.
Do you have to be online before you can write, or you can do it offline?
No, that's the best part. That's the best part. You don't have to be online. You can do it. So what you can do, you can download what I did, you know, and then run it. You can use your own computer as a server. You can do it all by yourself offline. That's why my goal is to be able to teach you guys, if you're interested in it, teach you how to build websites. I can send you a text message and say, okay, build a website for so and so. And then you do everything. Once you're done, you package it together in a zip file, send it or host it somewhere, and then someone else can check it out and say, yeah, it looks good. That's why I said it's easy for you to do it. You can do it anywhere in the world. I can take a job here and go to the beach where I don't have any internet, or go on a plane where I'm flying somewhere and do all the work on the plane. By the time I reach there, I send it to them and say, okay, it's done. Go online and look at it. So you don't need the internet when you're building it. You only need the internet when you want to host it on a server. And then anyone else that has internet can go now to that server to get it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why probably we will not be able to host it in Cameroon, because if the light goes off, the server will go down. So you want to host it with, they usually call them web host, a hosting service. Okay. So some popular ones are like GoDaddy, even I don't think Google does it. Bluehost, there's InMotion hosting. So you type everything on your computer, test it out, it looks good. you take all those files, go and store it on their web servers. Their web servers are usually on 100% of the time, 24/7. So if somebody wants to see your website, they click on that link will take them to their server, and it's good. You just have to pay them for monthly, annual subscription that you're using, depending on how big of the size you want, what kind of features you want, if you want them to have security, if you want them to back up your files, if they're broken, so on and so forth. Sounds good?
Sounds great.
Awesome. You guys have really, really wonderful questions. I'm really happy. All right, so no more questions. We got 1-2 minutes to go. All good?
All good. Thank you. It was a
You
great
are
one today.
very welcome. Awesome. So next week, we're going to get into cybersecurity. It's going to be another different story. We're going to learn about scamming and how to avoid it. Sounds good?
All right.
Sounds good.
All righty. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Ay, God.